Hello and welcome everybody to my workshop about music and blindness. I'm really happy that you are all here, and the first thing I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about facts about blindness and about myself a little bit and how I work as a blind musician. So yeah, I really hope you're gonna like that, and there are gonna be two more workshops, and I'm really happy if you will want to attend those two. Also, the title of the workshops is Blind, So What? So first, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ciara Moser, and I am one of the master students in the Berklee Global Jazz Institute. I am 24 years old and I am blind since birth, so I was born blind. I was born in Dublin, Ireland, and I moved to Austria when I was 4 years old. That's because my mother is Irish and my father is Austrian. So they actually met on a cruise ship where my father was the cook, the chef cook, and my mother was the chef of the stewardess team. So yeah, I also have two younger brothers, and the youngest brother is also blind. He has the same eye disease as me, and we are all 2 years apart from each other. So they're 22 and 20 years old. So my music career started very early. I started playing violin with 2.5 already, because my parents actually really found it important. As soon as they found out that I am blind, they informed themselves a lot, and they found out that it's very important for a blind person to learn an instrument because, yeah, it doesn't only help the development of the ears, but it also really helps for the development of body consciousness and of, yeah, kind of feeling yourself and learning things. Yeah, so I actually started piano when I was 8 years, because we always had a piano at home, and I love to play. And at some stage, my dad asked me if I want to play piano, and later um, I started to play drums and percussion because I always attended a lot of workshops in school, and I really enjoyed to play all different types of drums. And with 14, I discovered the bass. So that was actually really late. Until I was 14, I played a lot of orchestra projects and ensemble projects with the violin. And I was, yeah, I did a lot with that. But um, the bass I discovered with 14. And I actually started wanting to learn bass because we started a band with my brothers and some friends of mine, and yeah, we needed a bass player. So I guess that's the normal reason why people start to play bass. But yeah, I really started enjoying it, and at that time it was also the time to decide which high school to go to, and I was actually planning to attend a business high school. But when I started to play in this band, the band coach told me about a really cool pop high school you can go to in near the town I come from. So I decided to go there, and it's a high school focused on pop music. And yeah, there I played in several bands, and I started to really love playing the bass, and I actually decided that I want to study music. So after finishing school, I went to Vienna and studied music education at the University of Music and Performing Arts Vienna. And I actually have my bachelor since 2018. And since I started studying in Vienna, I am also a studio and session musician there, kind of. I play in a lot of different bands. I play in a salsa band, in a world music band, in a few jazz projects, and also I have a fusion quartet. So I play a lot of different styles of music. And after studying music education in Vienna, I decided that I want to go to Berkeley because I found out there is the assistive technology course there, and I went there to study undergrad for 1 semester. And during this time, I also finished my master degree in music education at the University of Music and Performing Arts Vienna. I actually have 1 exam left, but I'm going to finish it in the next few months, I guess. So yeah, and now I'm here in the Berklee Global Jazz Institute, and I got the great opportunity to do a workshop with you. I also have a lot of other hobbies. I love to make sports. So for example, I love to play football. I love to go to the fitness studio, to the gym. I also love to climb, to swim, to do ice skating. And I also skied races for 1 or 2 years. I will tell you about that a little bit later and how that all works. But yeah, I also really enjoy cooking, playing board games, doing nature activities, meeting friends, and watching movies, or also listening to audiobooks. So now I want to tell you a little bit about the eye disease I have. It's called Leber's congenital amaurosis, and it's actually a defect gene that causes that the retina doesn't have enough rhodopsin for the photoreceptors. That all sounds very complicated, but basically rhodopsin is the color source for the retina. So if the retina doesn't get any color, it can't really send pictures to the brain. So yeah, that's why I'm blind, and that's why I don't see any shapes and shadows, and I am actually blind from birth. Doctors say that with this eye disease, sight is better in the first few weeks after the child is born, but they're not sure about it because obviously a blind baby can't really tell them how much it sees. And now my remaining sight is I see light and dark when I go outside. I also notice if the light is turned on or not. And I don't see any shapes or shadows or anything like this. Yeah. So on this eye disease, there are actually researches being done, and they haven't really found a cure yet, but basically they are researching a lot because, yeah, gene biology, I think, is very interesting for all the biologists right now. I wear sunglasses, you probably already noticed, and I wear them to protect my eyes from the ultraviolet light, and also to keep my remaining sight, because the doctors who research on this disease, they say that it's important to protect your eyes if you have LCA. So I try to do that. And the defect gene in the eye only is active if both parents have the defect gene. So my parents are not blind, but they have the defect gene inside of their bodies. So that's why there is 25% of probability that the child can be blind. So that's why my other brother is sighted, because he actually was lucky and doesn't belong to the 25% probability. Yeah, so basically my parents didn't know before, and I was actually diagnosed with 8 months, and I was diagnosed because I didn't start focusing with my eyes. So normally when a baby is 6 weeks old, it starts to focus things with the eyes, and I didn't. So they went to the doctor, and we started finding out why that was like this. And my youngest brother, who was also blind, for him, they actually found out when he was 2 months old. So they actually saw that very fast. So yeah. And when I was diagnosed blind, I already said before, my parents did a lot to find out what's the best thing to do, or what are the best things to do if your child is blind. So they drove to the library and read a lot of books on what to do and what's the best way to educate a blind child. I'll tell you more about that later. Now I'll tell you a few general facts about blindness. So basically, blind doesn't always mean blind. So really blind, like if you're fully blind, you define that by checking if the blind person recognizes the hand when you hold a hand in front of their face like this. If you do that, for me, I couldn't recognize that this is a hand. I could sense that something is there, but I guess that's more because I hear it and I feel it. But I don't see that it's a hand. And if it is possible to recognize that this is a hand, then you normally say a person is visually impaired, because if a person is visually impaired, they see a lot better and they can, for example, read large print and see colors. So you'll think it's a lot better to be visually impaired, but I would say it doesn't really matter what you are, if you're blind or visually impaired, because being blind can be easier. Because for me, it's when I deal with other people, I tell them, well, I'm blind and I don't see anything, and it's clear that I don't see anything, and they have to guide me and help me with finding things if I ask them to do that. And for visually impaired people, that's not clear at all, because they all see different, you know. So it could be that somebody is visually impaired and sees maybe can read large print from 1 meter distance, or it could also be that the person is visually impaired and has to go really close with the eyes to see what's printed. So yeah, it's a lot different, because of course the eye is a very complicated part of our body. And most people, or most fully blind people, turn blind in a later age, actually. So the people who are blind from birth are very rare, and also my eye disease is very rare. A very other interesting fact is that only 1 person out of 10 is fully blind, so sees complete darkness. So as I already said, I don't see complete darkness. I see a little bit of light. So I see if the light will be turned on. And yeah, it's also important to remember that. So only 1 out of 10 people. And there's also a lot of difference between people who turn blind later or people who are blind from birth. So people who turn blind later, they have a lot of memories. So they can picture things better in their head, you know. They can, if you tell them, for example, distance in meters, or if you tell them colors, they will know what you mean. They will know how yellow, green, or black looks. A blind person from birth won't know that. And it's also really important that people who turn blind later, they dream with sight, and I dream without sight because I dream the same like I live. So I dream with touch, sound, feeling, taste, and smell, but not, I don't dream, like I don't see in my dreams. And the other big difference for people who are blind from birth is that blindness belongs to normality, like it's just normal for them. I mean, for me especially, it's very important to say that blindness is a characteristic and not a disability. So blindness belongs to me. It's like I have brown hair and I'm blind. So yeah. Now I would love to tell you something about education of blind children. The most important thing is that the parents let you do everything. So my parents were very open, and I think it can be very hard as parent from a blind child also, because you have to really try to give the child the freedom to try everything out. And they brought me up very independently. So they really tried to expose me to different experiences. And it's also interesting that if you sit a blind child in the corner, like if you just sit, like put it in a corner and have the child sit down, it'll just sit there for a few hours and stay there because it has no stimulations through sight. So you have to bring the stimulations to the child. You have to like bring audible stimulations or like touchable stimulations that the child starts to get interested in something, because otherwise it'll just stay sitting in the corner and that's not good. And that's why it's like very, very important to confront a blind child with many different experiences, sports and music, and also letting the child do a lot of different things in daily life. For example, letting the child eat on its own, or tie the shoelaces, or there are so many things I can think of. A very, very important fact is that if you want to be independent, or if you want your blind child to be independent, it has to be integrated into normal schools and institutions and clubs. You really have to make sure that the child gets to live as normal as possible, and that the blind child really lives in the sighted world. Because if you go to a school for blind people and you come out when you're finished, you still have to work in the sighted world. So you have to be able to integrate in the sighted community. I know I said blindness is a characteristic, and it makes me individual, and it also makes me different, but it makes me individual. But this means that I really have to be able to adapt to the sighted community, and I have to be able to tell people, sighted people, what I need in order to be able to work, to live, and to manage life. So that's, for me, the most important thing about education of blind people is communication. And of course, it's also the value is very important of exchange with other blind people. So of course, I'm not a big fan of schools for blind people. I find it very, very important that blind children have exchange with other blind children, because they see, okay, they're not alone, and they see how other blind children manage their lives and how they deal with things. So you may ask yourself how I orientate in in rooms, or how I find the way to the subway. So there is one important thing I always have with me when I go outside. It's the white cane. The cane shows me the steps or things that may be in my way. So I always say the cane is the third eye on the floor. So basically when I walk somewhere, I always have the cane on the floor and move it from left to right to feel the steps in front of me, or maybe to feel if there is a pillar in front of me. But yeah, basically the cane doesn't find the way for me. So what I have to do is I have to memorize all the ways. I have to memorize the way to the subway, I have to memorize the way to university, to grocery stores. And yeah, what I did here in Vienna, for example, or also when I was in Boston, I learned big stations by heart, so I could, for example, change subway in the big stations. So I could basically take every subway line. So if I want to go somewhere on my own, I can just tell the people who I'm meeting, yeah, please pick me up at the subway station, and I can just go there. So that's very important, and that's something that makes me very independent in big cities. Also, the most important thing is that a blind person never goes outside without a cane. Visually impaired people do, but blind people don't, because you have to have something that, yeah, shows you the barriers or the steps or whatever could be in front of you. Another important point about orientation is echolocation. So imagine you are a bat. You hear the reflection of sound. And for example, when I snap on the one side of the room, it sounds different than when I snap on the other side of the room. And that's basically what I use to orientate. So I hear how sound reflects from the walls, and I can orientate like this, like a bat. There's also something called active echolocation, where people click with their tongues. It's like sending a blaze of light to be able to see in darkness. So if you click with your tongue, you have a very clear sound of your environment and of where you are. But you don't actually need it. You can also only use passive echolocation and work with the noises that are around you. So when I walk, I hear my steps reflecting from the walls, for example. So you notice that I compensate a lot with my other four senses, especially with touch and sound. And interesting to know would be maybe that a sighted person, if you count all senses together, if all senses are 100%, a sighted person uses 80%, for seeing and 20% for all the other senses. So imagine I have to compensate 80%. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about technology, why I'm actually able to do this presentation. So I am able to use a phone and a computer, and it's basically possible because the computer speaks. There is a certain software called Screen Reader, and there are a lot of different screen readers for VoiceOver, for Apple, for Windows, for Linux, and all the different systems. And I mainly use Apple for music and everything. And the screen reader I use for Apple is called VoiceOver. And basically VoiceOver tells me everything on the screen. So if I move to a certain item, if I move the cursor to a certain item, VoiceOver tells me where I am. So VoiceOver tells me, I don't know, documents or mail, or it says unread email from blah, 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 blah. And I can write completely normal with the computer keyboard. So that's basically how I use a computer. And for the phone, it's actually the same thing. It's just a little bit different. So when I touch the screen with my finger, VoiceOver tells me which icon I am on. And if I want to activate the thing I am on, for example, if I say I'm on mail and I want to open mail, I double tap. So I I basically move over the screen with my finger, and I find the thing I want to activate, mail, messages, and it tells me everything. And as soon as I am on the thing I want to open, I just double tap. Okay, so now we are coming to Braille. Braille is the reading and writing system for blind people. I don't only read with a screen reader, so with the speech of computers. I also read Braille. And Braille was invented by Louis Braille in 1825. It is basically like this, that each letter has one cell. And one cell consists out of 6 dots. And yeah, each letter is basically one cell with the combinations of the 6 dots. So for example, dot 1, dot 4, and dot 5 would be a D. I think you can see a picture here in the presentation of the Braille letters. And for numbers, it is the following. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and so on. And there's just one number symbol in front of every number. So you'll have number symbol A is 1, number symbol D is 4, for example. Yeah, that's actually how I read. It's not complicated, but of course you have to practice a lot, and you have to really have a very good touching sense. So you practice a lot. You practice touching a lot when you're little, in kindergarten or in school, with touching memories and stuff like that. Yeah, and there is also a Braille display. So the Braille display shows what's on the screen of a computer. It actually is like a plastic thing, and in the front little dots jump out of it, and it shows what's on the screen, and it actually shows too what you're on with the cursor. And in the past, people just used speech all the time because they were like, oh my god, I don't have to read anymore, I can use a computer. Like blind people, the computer is going to read everything to me, and it was so great, and yeah. But basically what they found out later was that the blind people started to be analphabet because they actually never had to read anything, because there was no need for reading, because the computer speech read everything for them. So yeah, why? And they started like not being able to spell things, and that's why they invented the Braille display, so reading was still possible on the computer. Maybe it's also interesting to know that the Braille display, like when you read on the Braille display, one cell is not 6 dots, but 8 dots. So there is computer Braille, and computer Braille is a little bit different than normal Braille. So now I'm going to tell you about sports and games for blind people. Basically, sports is sports. So everybody can move their body. Blind people can move their body as everybody else because they don't have any problems, just with their eyes, not with their legs or with their arms or anything. So yeah, and the only thing is that they need certain support with sports. So for example, if you play football as a blind person, you play on a field that's a little bit smaller and that has barriers on the sides. And also you play with a ball with rattles inside. So you can always hear the ball no matter where it is. And when you play blind football, there is also a guide behind each goal, so that when I run towards the goal and I want to shoot the ball into the goal, then the guide like screams here, 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 that I know where the goal is. And for skiing, it works kind of similar. You have a guide, and the guide skis in front of you and tells you where to ski. So basically for skiing straight, the guide says, geht, 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 geht. And for turning, the guide says, und hop. And you always ski right, then left, then right, then left again. So basically it's, the guide can tell you which curve is first on the top of the mountain. So he always says, geht, 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 und hop, geht, geht, geht. And I basically ski behind the guide and try not to ski out of his tracks. And that's also how I ski races. There are a lot of different sports for blind people. I can't tell you about all of them today, unfortunately, because there's a lot I want to tell you today. But yeah, you can basically do nearly everything as a blind person, except from a few things where the ball flies, because you only hear the ball if it's on the floor, because it has to, you have to hear the rattles. Yeah, but there are certain sports with the ball you can still play, like football I just told you about. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you how computer games work. They also work with sound. So you only play mostly with earphones or with very good speakers. And for example, when you want to shoot somebody, or when you want to shoot, I don't know, something, then you have to listen. And when you hear that the sound is in the center, so the sound may go from left to right, and when you hear that the sound is in the center, you can press the shoot button. So this is one of the easiest games. There are also more advanced games like strategy games and, I don't know, card games and all kinds of different types of games. Also, things like PlayStation and Xbox is getting accessible right now. It's all in the start, because in the past, blind computer games were like for blind, but now they're really starting to make the digital games accessible for blind people, and blind people don't have to play extra games anymore. Board games actually work a little bit different. They work tactile. So they, for example, have tactile fields, and they have Braille cards. I, for example, had Monopoly, yeah, for blind people. So on that Monopoly, you could actually feel every field. So every field was circled by a tactile line. And above the field, you could read, for example, which street it was in Braille. And you had all of the cards in Braille, and the money was also, yeah, you could also keep the money apart because it was different in a tactile way. And yeah, that's basically how board games work. And card games also work with Braille cards. Yeah, I think that's the most important thing to know about board games. Of course, sometimes a blind person may be a little bit slower because, for example, chess, every figure feels different. So the queen has a little crown on her head, and the king, I don't know, has something different on his head. I think a cap or so. So if I play chess with somebody, I really have to feel every figure, and I have to kind of memorize it in my head where the figures are. So it could even take me like 20 minutes to move one figure, because I really have to think through different strategies. And if you have to feel all of that, it takes a lot longer if you don't see it, because you don't have the overview. So now we reached music and blindness. I learned violin through the Suzuki method, which is a method where you learn your music or your instrument, how you, like, same as your mother language or your mother tongue. And a very important thing about the Suzuki method is that you learn songs and you learn playing your instrument through hearing, and then in an older age you start learning through reading. So you actually start learning, you start learning your instrument like learning a language, or yeah, learning your mother tongue. I learn everything by heart through my ears, and I am very fast in memorizing songs because I never had another chance. I always had to do it like this. There are two big pillars of learning music as a blind person, or of being a blind musician, and that is the ears and the memory. That's the most important thing. You need good ears, but if you have good ears and you can't memorize what you're playing, you can't play it. So you need both. And I will try to show you in one of the two next workshops how you get better in memorizing and how you get better in learning songs through ear. Because for me, it's normal to learn 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 pages charts. So it's for me, it's just normality, you know, because I never had any different option. And what's also a very important thing for me is that I I always have to memorize a lot. So as a child, I was very good in memorizing phone numbers, for example, or yeah, all sorts of different numbers. Who was a lot better in me, who was a lot better than me in memorizing, was my brother, my youngest brother. He could actually memorize whole CDs. So you could say, "Play me Hard Henry," or "Tell me Hard Henry, chapter 5," and he'd start and tell you the whole chapter of the whole CD. So I find that very fascinating, and I have really seen blind people memorize a lot of fascinating things. A friend of mine, he's also a musician. He actually, like you say, yeah, Wagner's, I don't know what, opera, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, overture bar or something, and he'd go da, 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 and sing the whole song for you, and you'd be like, what, how did you know this now? And yeah, but the thing is that he was exposed so much to music as a small child, and basically what blind people do is they use their brain for different things, because 1/3 of our brain is used for visual things. So 1/3 of our brain is actually free when we're blind, when we don't see. And that's what blind people actually compensate. So they can use areas in the cortex that would actually be used for visual things, they can use for other things. Maybe, for example, for memorizing things, or for yeah, for for hearing, or for memorizing ways how to go to the subway. Yeah, so there is a lot of interesting things going on there. Also, what's very interesting, there have been a lot of researches that 60% of the blind musicians have perfect pitch, and 10% of sighted musicians have perfect pitch. So there are a lot more blind musicians who have perfect pitch. And I personally find that very interesting, because maybe it just develops when you have, yeah, a certain feeling for music, and when you're exposed a lot to music, and when you're not distracted through eyesight. It's also very interesting that 40 to 60% of the blind children have perfect pitch. So not only blind musicians, but also blind children in general. Okay, the next thing I'm going to tell you about is Braille music. So I also learned how to read Braille music. There is Braille music, and it was invented also by Louis Braille, by the inventor of normal Braille. And basically, it works the same as Braille letters. There are certain symbols for the notes. For example, dot 1, 4, and 5 would be the note C. So yeah, you could touch that and say this is the note C. And then there are dots added for rhythm. For example, if you would add dot 6, you would have a quarter note. And if you would add dot 3 instead, you would have half note. But if you wouldn't add any dot, you would have an 8 note. And if you would add dot 3 and 6 to the cell, you would have either a whole note or a 16th note. It depends, because it depends on how long the bar is. You also have certain signs for octaves, for dynamics, and for articulations. So you could maybe have a dynamic sign, then an articulation sign, then an octave sign, and then you have the note. So you notice it's very, very complicated, because all symbols are beside each other, because you read like this with the fingers and you don't really have the option to read more than one line. So you don't have this letter line system like we have, like this, or like the sighted people have. So it's hard to keep a good overview, because all the signs are beside each other. And the system is actually very old, because, as I said, it was invented by Louis Braille too. And yeah, no newer system has actually really, I mean, there have been systems developed, but this system is actually spread all around the world. So yeah, a lot of people are using it, and it's hard to like develop a new system and to etablize that. Also, another important thing is that reading during playing is not possible. So only singers can actually read when they play. And that's the reason why I only used it for studying. For example, I had ear training books I used. Yeah, and I could read the ear training example during singing them. So that was actually possible. And I think it's a very, very good exercise to be able to understand music. So, especially to be able to understand music theory. So you really have to think of, okay, how many flats and how many sharps does a key have? Because, you know, I never had to think of that. I just played in the key and it just sounded right to me. So yeah, why think of flats and sharps? It's just a lot of work and not necessary for me. But as soon as you read, you have to do that. And I think it's important to kind of keep track of the theory and to understand it. And I'm also in the opinion that it's really important for blind musicians or for blind people who study music to learn Braille music, because just a fact of reading music and the experience of reading music is so different than learning music just by ear. It just feels a lot different, because it's another channel through which you actually absorb music. And it's, for me, completely different and a completely different system. And also, I think that if you read music, it feels a lot different to me. So I actually, when I compose, I only compose with recordings or with writing things down through Sibelius. So I never compose with Braille music. And people all around the world actually really use Braille music, I told you before, but only for music education. I really don't know any professional musicians who read Braille music. I only know, I think I know one classical singer. She actually uses Braille music, and yeah, maybe more classical musicians, because there are a few books of different pieces of music in the Braille libraries of certain schools for blind people. There are Braille libraries in the big cities, so there are books with classical pieces there, but I actually never heard of anybody who really uses it in professional musicians' life. Only the classical singer, and obviously for her it was possible because she can stand there and hold her sheet music and read it with her hand during singing. So I was actually I was thinking of learning how to read Braille with my toes, so I could play with my hands and read with my toes. And we were actually trying to develop a system to turn pages with some, I don't know, some machine or something. But basically for me, what was the problem, that I am so used to learning by ear that for me it's just a lot of work to learn something through reading. And of course, if I do that more often, I get a routine, but it still never feels as natural as when I read something, or as when I learn something through my ears. It's just, yeah, completely different for me. And for me, it's still the most natural way to learn something through my ear. So yeah, then we get to learning and playing through ears. As I already said, it's the purest way to learn music, to learn songs, to learn an instrument, and to just inhale music through your ears and not through seeing, because it's nature. I mean, people didn't start writing music before they played it. In the ancient society, they didn't go and write something on a stone and then play it. At least I don't know about that. They started building something, and then like they started making flutes and they started singing, and they did everything that basically came out of their mouths that they liked and that sounded best to them and that expressed their emotions. So yeah, music is expressing emotions, and doing that through your body and through your ears, and actually really using the eyes for that came really late, as soon as somebody wanted to write down something. Probably as soon as somebody really composed long pieces of music, and as soon as they had to kind of, yeah, write it down for professional use, it started. And I would recommend learning anything that's possible through your ears. So, and also, of course, through memorizing. I always talk of the ears, but as I said before, no learning through ears if you can't memorize it. So yeah, I recommend that if you don't have to read, that you shouldn't read. Um, Sometimes it's not possible because of time pressure. For example, if you play in a theater or something, you will have to read because sometimes you get the sheet music 5 minutes before the show starts. Um, I understand that, I really understand that, but if you don't have to, so if you're practicing for yourself and if you're learning a song, or if you're, I don't know, if you're transcribing a solo or anything, I would recommend to do that through your ears, because it's just the purest way, and you don't have the sense of sight distracting you during learning the piece or during learning the solo, or whatever you want to learn. Also, I noticed that the ear is the purest way to learn music when I was playing in the orchestra, because I feel what the conductor does. So I feel the emotion of the song, and I try to feel the orchestra as one instrument. And a lot of people say, "But you can't play in an orchestra. How should you do that? Because I mean, you don't see the conductor, and if you have like something where you have to come in on the one and you have to all be together and whatever, you know, timing wise. Yeah, but it does work, because if the orchestra is really played as like it's really together and really feels the song and feels what they're playing, you don't have to see the conductor. The same thing works with cues in bands. So if I, for example, playing in a jazz band and the saxophone player is playing a solo. In bands where I don't know the musicians so well, they'll always maybe have to give me some kind of audible cue. So I don't know, the drummer has to do a certain feel, or maybe the drummer has to say, okay, let's go on, or sometimes they just shout, ah, when their solo is over. But in bands I play with really often, I have a few friends I play together with really often, they don't have to say anything when their solo is over, because I know them and I hear when their solo is over. I feel when their solo is over, because the band develops a kind of develops the solo together and develops the emotion of the solo together, and you feel the tension, and when the tension starts to like be on the highest points, you feel that it's going to be over in the next form, like, or in the next chorus, or after the next cycle, and you'll just feel when it stops. You can also, if you play in a band, like sit down with the band and close your eyes or wear blindfolds, and try to play and try to feel each other, and try to feel when the solos are over, and when and when you have to come in or stop playing, or you'll see it's going to be a lot different if you don't look at each other. It's something that that you really can't describe in words. It's a lot different than for sighted people. I think it's maybe, I don't know, some kind of sixth sense, because you can't feel it, you can't see it, you can't taste it, and you can't hear it, and you can't smell it. So it's some kind of energy in the air that that is developing when I play in an orchestra or in a band. And I'm sure that this happens to everybody. It's kind of a flow you're in, but just try to be more aware of that if you play in a band. So yeah, I just shortly want to tell you about Avid. Pro Tools is a recording software, and Sibelius is a software for notating. They are both fully accessible, and that's the cool thing about them, because Sibelius actually is only accessible since January 2020. And I learned about this actually in an article in the internet where I read about the assistive music technology course at Berklee College of Music. So that was the main reason why I wanted to go to Berklee. I read that I could learn how to use Sibelius and Pro Tools. And 2 years ago, I didn't know that this was possible. I didn't know that I could write down my music on my own. So basically what I did was I composed a whole big band tune in my head. Imagine composing a tune in your head. I mean, Beethoven did that, for example. You could also try out that, compose a tune in your head and try to imagine what the instruments are going to be playing. I think that will feel a lot different than composing by writing it down or by recording it. So yeah, I found out about Berklee and I learned how to use all of this software, and that was an amazing experience that broke a lot of barriers for me as a musician, as a blind musician especially. Now I want to give you a little homework, or as Danilo Perez likes to say, life work, because I don't want you to do it only until the next workshop. I would love if you could do do something for me, and this would be to learn a tune just through your ears. And I don't want you to cheat, but it's okay if you double check in the end as soon as you have finished. So I don't know, if you have some sheet music and if you have a recording of the song, try to learn it just by hearing the song. And then check the sheet music, and then try maybe just reading from the sheet music, and maybe you'll feel the difference between reading and just playing by ears. The second thing I would like you to do would be just to be more aware of your ears. So when you listen to a song or a melody you like, then try that when you listen, try to imagine playing the tune on your instrument. So try to imagine how you would play the melody or the chords or whatever you want to play. And if you can imagine how to play this, you just have to unpack your instrument and play it. So please try that out. And in general, be more aware of your ears. When you walk outside, you have a lot of different sounds you will hear. Not only the cars, but also the birds and the subway, and they all make musical sounds. Try to find similarities between the life sounds, like between the sounds you hear outside and between music. I'm sure that you will find some. And I know that learning a song through your ears will be hard in the beginning, but I am sure that it won't be a problem and that you will actually find a routine as soon as you do it more often. I am sure that you will find your routine and that you will feel a lot better than reading it through sheet music. I mean, a few people might not feel better because they only read sheet music since they're little, so I understand that too. But if you did it like this, I would just recommend discovering this way of learning music and of learning songs. Actually, some of my friends, they now even have difficulties with reading because they were inspired by me and learned music only through their ears. And yeah, they're actually very happy. So yeah, I really think that reading is a very, very important thing, and that you have to be able to do it as a sighted person for certain jobs. But I really want you to discover the world of just hearing music.